It's really good to be here. And what I'm going to try and do in the next 15 minutes is to try to give you a sense of the context of the changes that are taking place in the life sciences and in general, so that you can get a feel for what it really means, what's happening today. And what's occurring is that there are such amazing possibilities. You hear about them in the news all the time. And it is really something that is fundamental in terms of the trajectory of life itself that is occurring. There are issues of human embryonic stem cells. There's pharmacogenomics, where people are tailoring drugs to our individual genetic constitutions. And what is really occurring, let me see if this works. What is really occurring is that as a whole, these things are leading to almost an awakening. It is really a transition in the history of life. And let me tell you a little bit about what I mean by that, is that this is not just about human history. This is going to be looked back on 100,000 years, 1,000,000 years from now, as a fundamental transition in life. And there are two things that are absolutely unprecedented that are occurring today. The first of these is the Silicon Revolution. Yeah, this doesn't seem to work very well. And we're familiar with all the products of that. What's actually occurring, if you step back a little bit, is that we're taking the silicon dioxide, the sand, the inert sand at our feet that we walk on, and we're breathing a level of complexity into it that rivals life itself. What that means is that we're animating the inanimate world around us. Unprecedented. And as a child of that revolution, we're beginning to understand the processes of life at such an intimate level that we're beginning to intervene in those processes. And it's beginning slowly, but you can see where the trajectory is leading us. And it's leading us to take control of our evolutionary future. And that is a huge, huge thing. And the last time it happened was about 500 million years ago, when simple cells and tissue basically learned to organize simple non-biology, calcium carbonate, calcium phosphate, in order to create shells and bones that allowed the large body plans that we're aware of. It created ourselves. And another way of seeing what's occurring today is that now complex biology, our cerebral cortices, and complex non-biology, all of the computer chips and everything, are coming together in a very intimate fashion to create a global superorganism, an entity that is richly interconnected, just like the cells in our own body. That is the reality of what is occurring today. And so, this thing doesn't work very well. Technology doesn't always work all that well. What it's doing is it's blurring a lot of boundaries. It's changing it's blurring the line between therapy and enhancement. It's blurring the lines between the born and the made. Essentially, we have things like synthetic life that Craig Venter created last year. We have this fellow, Oscar Pistorius. He can run a 100-meter dash in 11 seconds. He has no lower legs. We have this woman here who is able to move a prosthetic simply by thinking what she wants to do, and the nervous signals are picked up in her chest. These are the very earliest baby steps, but you get the direction of what is occurring. And so we argue about cloning, about genetic engineering, but the reality, the depth of the issue that we're really facing is whether carbon-based, carbon and nitrogen tissue, flesh, is going to be transcended by the children of silicon. And there can be strong arguments that it will be, but for us, what really matters is our understandings in biology, because cut us open, and this is what we are, as we know very well. We're flesh and blood. But the understandings that we have about genetics and biology, that's who we are. So as we begin to get these understandings, we're talking about changing ourselves, about altering ourselves. And that's a very dramatic thing. It's kind of freaky, but think of the external world and the places that we've created all over the world that are these valleys of concrete and stainless steel and glass. This is not the Pleistocene, this is not the stomping ground of our Pleistocene ancestors. This is a new environment that we've created. And we're continuing to do these sorts of things with amazing architecture like this. And we're also, these tools are becoming more potent, more precise, more minuscule, and we're turning them back on our own selves. And before we're done, it's going to reshape medicine, and it's going to change ourselves in very, very deep ways. This next journey, we thought it was going to be out into space, Star Trek. We were going to go outside. It's not. It's an inner journey. That's really what the next thing is, because that's what we really care about. It's ourselves. So this is a journey into ourselves, and it's going to be an amazing exploration that is occurring. The possibilities are immense. There are three basic ways that we're going to reshape ourselves. One is our biology. One is the way we handle our minds, our mental processes. And the other is reproduction. And they've already begun. So is changing our biology some goofy stuff like this, like wings or something? No, this is Hollywood or Bollywood or wherever. But think of something that we actually care about, like aging. If you could actually control the process of aging, alter the process of aging to add extra years of vitality rather than decrepitude, would we want that? I mean, it's very easy when you're young to imagine that you're immortal and you're unaware of the trajectory of life. But even somebody like Mick Jagger, who takes care of himself so well, there becomes a day when you realize that, you know, actually time is not going to pass you by. And if we could make that kind of an intervention, which is quite plausible, mainstream biogerontologists say, a number of them have said that the first person to live to be 150 years ago is likely already alive today. It will transform everything about society if that occurs. The second area that I mentioned was our minds. So Viagra, Prozac, again, little baby steps that we influence the way we're thinking. But what if the nuances of our understandings of the mind, of the brain, of biochemistry, if we could create a cocktail of interventions that actually made you feel completely fulfilled without doing anything, without side effects? You were just happy to be you doing whatever you're doing. Would you be able to resist taking that intervention? I suspect not. But who would you be if you didn't resist that? So that's going to be very, very challenging to us. And then the third is our children. As we begin to understand what the meanings are of genetics, what the constellation of genes that shape us, what it means about our temperament, our personality, our potentials, our vulnerabilities, we're going to want to make those choices. And I think that, you know, people are going to increasingly, I would predict, see that that choice about the genetic constitutions of our children is something that's too important to just leave to chance. Just a moment. It's hard to have a lot of images when you can't move them forward. So the question is, you know, is any of this real? In the year 2000, when the Human Genome Project was occurring, there were stories of all these great things that were going to happen. And what's really happened? People still die of heart disease and cancer. There isn't even a decent drug for Alzheimer's. It doesn't seem to have led anywhere. And, you know, there were these great promises, but where are all these wonder drugs that everybody talked about at the time? And so one could wonder whether it's going to happen at all. Certainly it's not because of the lack of spending. Here we're talking about spending moving towards about $50 billion a year in the pharmaceutical industry, but the number of new drugs, and particularly the ones of innovative new drugs, is constant or declining. So, you know, this was supposed to be the book of life, the code of codes. What happened? Why are we having such problems? And the real question is, when is this image of sort of medicine in the future going to have any reality in the present? And I would argue that it's going to be sooner than you think, because there are many, many developments that are occurring in different areas that have great synergies, and they're all occurring simultaneously. And when they come together, there will be enormous consequences. It's kind of like a piece of paper. You take a piece of paper and you heat it up. And it warms up, it gets warmer, it gets warmer, it gets a little darker, nothing happens, and then suddenly, poof, it bursts into flame. And that's what is about to happen. And the thing that is occurring is that information about ourselves, rich information, is becoming so cheap that it can be taken rather broadly. The most obvious case of that is in genomics, where the price of sequencing our genomes, reading our genetic sequence, has decreased 5 orders of magnitude in the last 10 years. In that graph, you can see what's happened in computers, and we know how rapidly they've gone. In biology, it's gone even more rapidly. And here's an example of a person I know in Europe, an entrepreneur. He spent $250,000 to sequence his own genome. Didn't have very much information that was of use to him, but right now, you could do the same thing for $8,000. And if you wait a little while, you'll be able to do it probably for under $1,000, for maybe $100. So the cost of this information is beginning to be essentially free. And how to use it is what the challenge is. There's this explosion, it's this tsunami of information that is just deluging us. And the amount of medical information that is produced is going up by tenfold every few years. So this is enormous, and when we begin to make sense of that, it's going to have significant implications. Lee Hood will probably get a Nobel Prize. He's running an institute called the Systems Biology Institute. He was the creator of the genetic sequencer that underlies the Human Genome Project. And what he thinks we'll do very shortly, within 10 to 15 years, is that we will go in on every 6 months, and we will read the status of tens of thousands of cells in our bodies. We will be looking at thousands of the surfaces of many, many different proteins, of the proteins on the surfaces of many, many different immune cells. We'll be looking at the different genes that are expressed, essentially hundreds of millions of bits of information that we'll be taking on ourselves in a healthy state twice a year. And this will happen with microtechnology, where you're talking about a fraction of a drop of blood. It'll be happening on a very automated scale, in an automated way. And it'll be coupled with physiological sensors that you can already, this exists today. That thing on the tip of a finger is basically where something that monitors the arterial pressure. So if you're at risk of a heart attack, you could have that would monitor your arterial pressure and send it out to a detector, to something that's analyzing that information. So it's basically transforming medicine into an information science in a way that has never been meaningful. Previously, you could get little bits of information. They weren't of very much use at all. And that's going to have an enormous amount of impact on medicine. It's going to make it more predictive. It's going to make it relate to ourselves as individuals. It's going to make it deal with prevention because of that, the possibilities of this knowledge. And it's going to require our participation, our engagement with our health and decisions we make about what we do with this information on a regular basis. And it's creating a new aspect to healthcare. It's going to be proactive. It's going to be centered around information technology. That is going to be the challenge of the next generation, is to make sense of this. It's going to happen relatively soon. And the surprising thing is that not only will it be revolutionary in that it will really sweep away medicine as it exists today, at least Western medicine, but it's going to be inexpensive and it's going to be available to virtually everyone. And the reason for that is that while it is terribly expensive to create these technologies, tens, hundreds of billions of dollars, once they're created, the incremental cost of using them for various people is almost zero. And in fact, the value of them is increased when more people use them. So it really is a virtuous circle. It's kind of, and they're way beyond individual capabilities. I mean, physicians will be able to contribute a part of that knowledge, but it will be a body of knowledge that is beyond this, that is processed by computational, by expert systems, and it is going to somehow be embodied in an interface in a way that we can communicate and access this in a way that is natural to us through speech. It'll be like having this very, very wise physician uncle in some way, and whoever can crack this problem and can create these kinds of things is going to essentially be shaping about 20% of the global GDP, because this is going to be something that everybody is going to want. And I said it's going to be a revolution, and I said it's not going to be for the rich, which everybody likes to think it's really going to bifurcate society. I'll show you why it's not. Let's take an example of the internet. If one person has access to the internet because they're so rich and they create this thing, it is absolutely useless. It's because it's sharing information among us all. That's what's really important about it. And the same thing is true with cell phone technology. With cell phone technology, here was the first mobile phone. Gordon Gekko in Wall Street. A kilogram, and you can use it for less than half an hour. So this is what the masters of the universe had 25 years ago. Now, Maasai tribesmen have something that can put that to shame. If you look at cell phone, who would have thought 20 years ago that India would have a better phone system than the United States? Okay? You cannot get cell phone coverage when you wander around. So there's leapfrogging that occurs for societies. And I think that the same thing is not only possible, but is likely to occur in medicine and healthcare. Because there are sclerotic, highly regulated systems that exist in the United States and Europe that are very difficult to change. And the challenge as we explore this next frontier is not to follow. It's about taking all of this information, thinking of creative ways that we can use that and that we can make it of value to ourselves, and creating new systems, new architectures. And there's a great advantage in having the ability to construct a new system that you can put in place. It really can leapfrog the possibilities that will exist in existing systems.